Solving the climate crisis is not just about policy or technology. It's also about connecting with the power of nature. In this episode of Sustain Now, we speak with Zoe Gamble, a leader in the renewable energy space whose path has been anything but conventional. Zoe shares how a moment on a mountaintop at 16 sparked a lifelong commitment to protecting the planet. That sense of connection and responsibility led her to where she is today, leading Clean Choice Energy, a company that's reshaping how people access and think about renewable energy. We talk about the complexity of energy systems, the tension between market dynamics and climate goals, and what it takes to make your voice heard in the climate sector. What makes this such a powerful episode isn't just the technology. It's the reminder that for those of us working in the climate sector, despite the setbacks and uncertainty, we contribute to something larger than ourselves. We hope this conversation leaves you inspired, curious, and maybe just a little more connected. Happy listening.
Hello, Zoe. Thank you so much for joining my podcast today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to talk about it because I think this is something super pressing right now is the transition to clean energy. There's been a lot of discussions just recently as well around of the Trump administration here in Europe about energy security and etc. So I'm very excited to talk to someone who has a lot of knowledge in that sector.
Yes, it's a very relevant issue in today's time. Yes.
Before we deep dive into it, can you go through your life? Like what it has been, because I was reviewing it and I saw, you dropped out high school early, then you did environmental law, you joined energy and so on. I think it has been not like a clear path, or usually what people would say, despite I think there is never a real clear path to life or to a career. But still would be interesting, where, like, what has been the pivotal moments in your life if you go through, I don't know, from teenage age to that where you are right now? What has been these moments where you think, okay, this is where something changed or I decided something else in my life?
Yeah. So it's true. I did leave high school early. I would say a pivotal moment was having a conversation with my chemistry teacher, Mrs. Try, after school one day. I was a sophomore in high school and, I really was struggling because I did not fit inside of the environment that I found myself in. I was living in a pretty small town south of Dallas in Texas. And she said to me, high school's not for everybody. You don't have to do this. You can go get your GED, which is like an equivalent diploma, skip high school and go straight into community college. And so that idea was a turning point for me. And so I did that. I dropped out of high school. I got my GED. I moved to Austin, Texas, myself surrounded by more like-minded, curious people. And what would have been my junior and senior year of high school was my freshman and sophomore year of college. And then I transferred into a 4-year university. The good side, downside was that I was finished with college at 20. And so it's a pretty young age to be out in the world trying to figure out who you are and what you're doing. So I moved to New York City. And I still can't believe this. I look back on it and I can't imagine any of my children ever doing this, but I moved to New York City with $600 in a backpack. And I crashed on somebody's couch for like a month. And I did eventually end up getting a job working for a nonprofit organization that was doing work on sustainability. I'd always been passionate about environmental issues. Some of that traces back to an incredibly profound moment that I had when I was 16. I had hiked Mount Shasta. And when I got to the top, I had a very clear sense of being one with the earth and how much devastation was being wrought across this planet that we call home. And that has been a real North Star for me across the course of my life. I find myself most connected to who I really am and a sense of my own spirituality when I'm in deep nature. And I think there is a lot that we can learn from nature. And that so much of our suffering really is a result of the misperception that we're somehow not a part of it. So in any event, I was in New York City and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I was just wandering around lost and, asking everybody, what should I be when I grow up? And I had a friend of mine who just looked at me and said, Zoe, God's not going to rain purpose down on you. You just need to pick a direction and start walking. And so I happened to go see the movie Erin Brockovich. And I thought, wow, this chick is awesome. I want to be able to be a warrior for the environment. And so I started researching it, and I found out about the Vermont Law School, and it had the #1 environmental law program in the country. And I ultimately did go to school there. When I was in law school is when I started to understand the importance of energy and the impact that energy has on the greater environment. I started to see that was a place that you just kept seeing as a theme over and over when you think about impacts. And, I can talk more about my life story, but those were the major sort of ingredients that set the trajectory for where I am now.
Amazing. And when you were 16, you went up to a mountain. Did I understand that right? Like you went
Yeah, it's in California. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, wow.
I call it my summer of love and adventure. I was a Jack Kerouacking it, and I was just traveling all over California. I mean, yeah, it was a pretty non-traditional experience. I don't think I certainly would not allow my 16-year-old to do the things that I did when I was that age, but it was a great adventure for me. And
amazing.
I learned a lot about myself in that.
And then after environmental law, you joined your first company. It's like, which company was it?
So I graduated from law school. I'd gotten married. I had at that point lived all over the place. So I thought, sure, I'll go back to your home state. No problem. So we moved to North Carolina, and I just got whatever job I could get. I mean, because I had massive amounts of student loan debt. And I ended up getting a job at a law firm that specialized in tax credits. And so there wasn't really any renewable energy at that time. So these were low-income housing, historic, new market tax credits. And I learned how to do project finance using tax equity as a result of that experience. And when North Carolina had passed its renewable energy portfolio standard, and there was a nascent renewable energy industry that was on the rise here, I was right place, right time, right low billable hour rate, because I was young for all these startups. And I knew enough about energy and tax equity that I ended up just representing pretty much everybody here in the state, and started the state's first renewable energy law practice. When I was pregnant with my second child, I found out that she was going to be born without part of her right arm. Mm. And that moment kind of hit the pause button. It made me evaluate what matters most. And I could see that becoming a partner in a law firm was just not my path. And so I looked out across my clients, and I picked the one I liked the best in terms of the culture of the organization. And I approached them and asked them if I could become their general counsel.
Was that Pine Gate Renewables, or? No,
that was a company called FLS Energy. Mm-hmm. And it was, we all, a lot of us came together there. So the current CEO and president of Pine Gate, Ray and Ben, we worked together at FLS. I would sort of joke around that Ray was the best hire I ever made, because his wife was a dear friend of mine that lived down the street, and he was tired of working in real estate, and we needed a finance guy. So I recruited him to leave real estate, and he came into FLS, and then
when was it around about? Which year was it?
This was in 2010, 11, something like that. Yeah.
So it was right at the clean tech one wave kind of thing.
Yeah, very, very early days. Very early. When it wasn't 100% sure that it was all going to come together. Yeah.
Yeah, because then I think then the actual wave went pretty down, and then it started 2018, 19 again. How did you experience these two waves now? And going first, the first wave, a lot of expectations didn't fulfill maybe, or we were just not there yet. Then went down, and now the second wave come, and many probably say we might be at the downside of the second wave. How did you experience these two waves, or do you see it actually as a second wave, or are we just going on now and it's just an involvement?
I think that the thing about renewables is that it is so complicated, and you're bringing together, there's 50 different set of state rules, there's RTOs and ISOs, there's federal policy, there is local considerations, there's there's new technology, there's permitting, there is a macro environment when it comes to the rise of artificial intelligence and data centers that are going to start driving energy markets in a way that we can't really imagine. I think it's a dance. I don't think of it as a waves. I think of it as a dance. There's been ebbs and flows, and there's always something going wrong. Like there's just always something going wrong. There's always some really, existential problem to solve. And that's part of what makes the industry fun and exciting and challenging, makes it worth doing. I often say to people, if there was an easy button, it would have already been done by now. And that's why your job is important. That's why what we're doing matters.
How big is, like, if you give me, I'm based in Europe and we are very different in the structure and etc. Can you give me like a big picture of the renewable sector in the US? Like how much percentage is right now renewable? How is it, is it now still accelerating? Is Trump bringing it down, or is it just continuously? We're reading a lot of things over here, and it's quite difficult to understand, like, how is industry working there, and where are we standing right now?
Yeah. I think, I know a lot of the European players are pulling out of the US market. There's a lot of skittishness and anxiety from limited partners at the European market. I think my observation of European investors is they've been kind of in and out the US market for a long time. The concept of tax equity and the way that renewables get financed and built here is very different and seemingly sort of opaque and foreign. That has kept, I think that's kept some of the European investments kind of at bay or in and out.
Can you elaborate how they are financed?
Yeah. So in the US, if you imagine you have a project and you're thinking about sources and uses, so you have a capital stack, where is your money coming from? You have traditional bank debt, project debt. You have traditional project equity. And then another piece of the capital stack comes from tax equity. And so what happens is a project forms a single purpose entity that owns a project, and another counterparty that has tax liability, oftentimes that's insurance companies or banks or even some of the larger corporates, will come in to the project LLC for a period of 5 years and act as effectively a very limited partner. And they invest money at the time that the project is being built and once it's constructed. And so they make the investment in exchange for the tax credits. And so they make the investment, and what they get in return for that are tax credits. So that typically makes somewhere between 30 and 40% of the capital comes in the form of tax equity. And there's just a lot of rules about that. There's 30 years of tax law that governs it, and it's not all perfectly written out. And that's a different way of doing things. The other thing that is a little different is that you have really 50 different sets of rules. So there's some states where there's deregulated markets. There's some states where there's regulated markets. There's that kind of everywhere in between. You have states that have policies that are incentivizing renewable energy. And then there's community solar, which is a different policy framework. And so I think that there's such different market conditions that unless you're really here and because so much of development is local, what your route to market is, and you have confidence in that, I think that can sometimes be a challenge.
Got it. And how is in general right now the trend regarding renewables in the USA? Is it still, there has been a lot of acceleration during the Biden administration. Is it still feeling like, there's a lot of getting things built and structured in that way? Like, do you think it's slowing down, or it's actually just, accelerating further as it has been, or has been there a shift to other technologies? How do you see that?
I would say that the broader macro environment for renewables is going to continue the acceleration of renewables, regardless of action or inaction by the Trump administration or the current Congress. There is so much momentum for the industry. And when you talked about the first wave and the second wave, I guess the one thing I would just say is that during the first wave, it was a lot more expensive to build and things were a lot harder to do. And it wasn't fully certain that renewables would sort of prevail. In this second wave, the cost of renewables has come down so much. And there's such a demand, a need for new sources of energy. And it's faster to build renewables than anything else. I mean, if you put in an order for a gas turbine today, it would take you 10 years to get it. And I think renewables are just a part of the critical infrastructure in a way that they have not been historically.
Can you give us a number? I know that you said it's in 50 states, it's differently each of, how the energy is supplied and the whole energy regulations, but can you give us a number how much renewable energy supply is actually there already?
Yeah, so let's see. 24% of U.S. electricity generation comes from wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, and biomass. So if you were going to combine all of that, it's about a quarter of the current generation. In terms of the future, I think something like 90% of new capacity that's filed in the U.S. is renewable.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So despite the AI in consumption of new energy, it's still primarily then fulfilled with renewables? That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's changing, but I think that there is definitely we're in a really dynamic market. And I think some of the things that were true even a year ago. I mean, just think about ChatGPT. I don't know about you, but I use that tool in a way that I never would have imagined a year ago.
Yeah.
And so, I think we're kind of entering into a window of time where things are really unpredictable. And I think that uncertainty is the biggest headwind for renewables in general, but the dynamic changing markets of the need for new electricity is also a tailwind. And so, I think that's just part of what is. I think we're all kind of living through a window of time in human history where we are being reminded almost daily that we really cannot predict the future. Yeah. None of us are soothsayers.
Yeah, I really liked it. I just think that's so true that, we're very bad in what is long term, what is short term. I think we kind of see the trends, but we never know when it's actually happening or not happening. And I totally agree. I think the last 2-3 years has been acceleration of changes which no one could have imagined. And coming back to, the AI demand for energy, and maybe let me know if I understood you correctly, it's also a tailwind because renewable energy is usually way easier and quicker to deploy than actually, building a new gas pipeline or doing something like that in that
Yeah.
sense. So actually the demand, which is increasing heavily on supplying electricity and energy, is actually helping right now renewables. Is that what I understood correctly?
I mean, that is what the consensus view is. And there is, again, a question. How much of that is a bubble? How much of that is hype? I mean,
Or
when you
hope?
look at the grid and when you look at the IR, like the resource planning on the East Coast, I mean, there's been like 50 gigawatts of new demand around Virginia alone of interconnection requests for data centers. I mean, it's kind of beyond anything that we can really imagine, the amount of demand that is being asked of the grid for new data centers. How much of that actually transpires, and how much of the data center usage materializes, I think is somewhat of an open question.
And you said, how much did you said? 50 billion kilowatt is the demand,
No, 50,
right?
yeah. 50, so there's 40 gigawatts of new applications of data centers that are that have applied to interconnect with the grid in Northern Virginia alone.
Oh, wow.
Just around the DC area.
That's
and
crazy.
that the whole rest of the country is experiencing massive amounts of requests and demands and need for where is the generation going to come to meet that load in a way that is reliable?
Yeah, and I think reliable, and that's always, at least, here in Europe, it's always been the high discussions of the supply, that having a steady supply, not these, ups and downs, ups and downs. I'm not sure, is it the same way in US as well? Are you having more, sunny days or more stable supply through renewables? Or is it the same discussions about that, if there's no sun and no wind here, especially in Germany, we have a problem with the energy steady supply? Is that a similar discussion in US?
Yeah, I mean, yes. And these things can be integrated. Wind, solar, and batteries combined, working together, provide a lot of energy and capacity on the grid. I am not unrealistic in understanding that there is a need for baseload generation to maintain reliability on the grid. But then there's these sort of, I mean, I was just reading an article today about how in Texas there's a bill that's been introduced that would mandate that 50% of all electricity being generated at any given time would come from natural gas. And that will cause rolling blackouts in Texas. That will stop economic development in Texas because there is so much wind and solar and battery storage that's already installed in Texas that it would force all those renewables to go offline in order to maintain a 50% natural gas. It's crazy. That's crazy town. Like, that's not that, it's sort of an inverse of what you want to see. So while it's true that renewables need gas right now, perhaps there's a world where we're moving into hydrogen that could provide that. But for now, we need gas. It's an important part of the equation for economic growth and maintaining energy reliability. But to deny the contributions that renewables make is equally as short-sighted.
So how is it for Clean Joy's Energy? What's your role in that whole industry? What kind of role are you taking, you used to take and want to take in future?
Thank you. That's a good question. So Clean Choice is in the US, there are some markets, some states where they have deregulated and allow for customers to choose who they buy their electricity from. The vast majority of the US, you are still in a vertically integrated sort of utility where you can only buy electricity from your local utility. So, but in the states where you have the choice, consumers can choose to buy their electricity from Clean Choice. The company's been around for almost 13 years. It historically met that by buying wholesale energy and combining it with renewable energy certificates. The US market is driven by two things: tax credits and renewable energy certificates. A renewable energy certificate is effectively it's a commodity. It's an intangible commodity. So if you imagine that there's the brown power represents the unit of energy, if the same energy came from a green source, that separate green attribute can be separately traded. And so when you build a solar farm and you plug it into the electric grid, you get paid a price, a wholesale energy price that changes every 15 minutes, depending on what's clearing in the market. That's one source of revenue. The other source of revenue is whoever you sell your green attribute to. So, Facebook, or I should say Meta, Microsoft, all of those companies, when they say they're 100% renewable energy, they don't have like solar farms sitting behind their data centers plugging into, their operations. They're purchasing renewable energy certificates, and they're buying those RECs from solar farms. Well, Clean Choice is no different. Instead of selling those RECs to Meta or Microsoft, a solar farm would sell their RECs to Clean Choice. And so we would buy wholesale energy and RECs and then sell that retail to our customers. We would sort of, do the work of finding those RECs and selling them to customers. When 3 years ago, the company made a decision and I know this is going to sound a little crazy, but building a business that has a customer relationship and is able to successfully and cost effectively acquire customers and retain them is probably the harder part of a business. It's in some ways that is more difficult than finding a piece of land, interconnecting it, raising the money, and building a solar farm. Mm-hmm. My background has been all in that area. So, from lawyer to going inside of the companies that I was inside of as general counsel and then later as CEO of Pinegate, we were all independent power producers building and owning generation.
What has been the reasoning then coming from, I think it's called renewable energy credits, like kind of that model to actually build your own solar plant? Like what has been the reasoning behind?
I mean, there's two reasons. One is to continue to expand our impact in the world and to back up the promises that we're making our customers. And we want to continue to grow our business and reach new customers and bring help individuals continue to make choices for clean energy. And so one way to do that is to really build and own and operate the infrastructure for it. The other very important reason is it actually improves the risk inside of our own business, because right now we're subject to a commodity market, and our customers, when for example, in the US, when Russia invaded Ukraine and there were gas spikes around the world, there were huge energy spikes in the US. If we have customers that are on a variable rate contract, which at that time, most of our customers were on a variable rate contract, they're going to experience a massive spike in their energy prices because that's what's happening in the market at large. In order for us to provide our customers with a fixed price of energy, we have to have access to a fixed cost of energy. And a company that forward purchases 2 years of energy so that it can offer a fixed price to our customers requires an enormous amount of liquidity. And capital partners don't want to invest in that kind of a business. That's viewed as a risky business. But they are willing to invest in infrastructure because then you have a piece of, steel in the ground. And raising money to build and own and operate our own assets is a lot easier. And then we have a fixed price of energy that we can then go offer our customers, which is really what we're seeing that the consumer market is looking for, is that there's been a remarkable shift on the other side of the energy spikes that came from Ukraine, and what happened in Texas with Hurricane Uri. Customers want to know that they have certainty in an inflationary environment.
I think so. You're saying why you're doing it. Just to summarize again, like you want to lower the risk. One part is having a new offering, but it's mainly driven by having a fixed price possibility, and as well, like it's easier to fund. So it's also because there has been some criticism about Clean Choice that around prices, that it's quite expensive and etc. Is that how you want to address it? That you say,
Yeah.
okay, you want to stabilize the prices in that sense?
Exactly right. Yep. If we can own generation that we built in an inflationary energy environment, that is a product that our customers will benefit from.
So how much energy, I saw like a old number, I'm not sure if it's a real number, 9.1 billion kilowatt. I'm not sure if it's since 2012 or if you do that every year. How much kilowatt per hour do you do per year?
We bought 2 terawatt hours of energy last year.
And how much percentage you want to have your own infrastructure?
So a lot of that has to do with coincident versus non-coincident generation. And so when I say that for your listeners, what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about the sun, it shines in a hill, right? Like the sun comes up, it peaks, it comes down. Well, people come home, their highest usage is typically on the other side of when the sun is starting to come down. They're coming home from work and, they're starting to use more energy. And so for us to generate solar in a way that doesn't have that meets our customer demand inside of the shape of what solar looks like during the day, we would need about somewhere between 700 megawatts and a gigawatt of solar to meet our current customer demand.
What you have like of your existing customer base, what you have right now.
Yeah.
Is it primarily now consumer or is it a lot of businesses you're serving?
Right now we are almost entirely residential.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is an area, as we have more opportunities to own more generation and to build more generation, I can't say what the future holds, but certainly having customers that are third party contracting for part of our solar farms is likely in the future for our company.
If you think about how we just talked about how rapidly changing this industry is, despite that's crazy because infrastructure, you would always think infrastructure is such a long lead time and etc. What do you see, like what kind of trends do you see in the next 5 years, and what kind of Clean Choice, what kind of role can Clean Choice play in these trends?
My hope is that we become a trusted brand that consumers can rely on to make sure that we're providing the most sustainable energy that could be purchased on the market. And so over a 10-year period, I want to be able to get to a place where we're offering a close to 24-hour product, that we operate our solar farms and our other energy projects with other types of sustainability measures in mind, that we're doing carbon sequestration inside of our soil and how we're managing the dirt, right? How are we planting pollinators and other kinds of wildflowers to be able to create a more ecological, thriving environment, not just thinking about the energy, that we're thinking about the communities that we're located in. And so that when folks are buying our product, they know that they have a lot of confidence in what it is that they're buying.
So you're really going to shift from, let's say from my point of view, maybe it's totally wrong to say that, from like a marketplace or an aggregator to really like an infrastructure supply of renewable, renewable energy, to really do that transition to make more stable prices, more availability, and I guess then also energy storage systems.
Yeah, that's an important part of the equation. When you think about that, you'd have a solar farm that Part of it's going onto the grid and part of it's going into a battery, and then it's releasing that energy later on in the day when folks are coming home.
Okay. Super interesting. I like it's so cool to speak to someone who is so deeply into this and to let to know more, because you mentioned one thing at the beginning which was striking about this community solar projects. Maybe you can talk a little bit. I've seen that you're working on community solar project. What exactly is that, and how can the consumer benefit from that?
So technically, community solar is a very bespoke policy that only exists in a handful of states in the U.S. And it allows for a customer to subscribe. It's how that language that we use for community solar is that they're subscribing to the community solar farm. And typically what that means is they pay a certain amount of money, and then that's netted from their the amount of electricity that's produced from the farm. For their portion of it is getting netted from their bill. The utility is reducing their existing electricity bill. And so it allows for, in places that don't have any deregulation, it allows for the utility to continue to control the relationship with the customer and maintain a vertically integrated regulatory model, while having smaller solar farms basically have mini owners. Somebody can think of it that way, as like a mini owner. Now, the market for that is actually quite small. The total addressable market of that is quite small. And historically, Clean Choice did engage in community solar servicing. We developed community solar projects. Part of the strategic shift in the business that I have brought is that we are able to achieve a very similar result with a lot more flexibility in a lot more markets than currently has community solar. And that's because there are more states that offer retail choice. And so we can have a customer, for example, in Washington, D.C., and we could build a solar farm in Virginia or Pennsylvania. So there's a wider geographic spread for where we can build and achieve the same result. It's also not limited in size. Typically, community solar projects are limited to 5 megawatts or less. And while that has many wonderful advantages for the distribution grid, it also is a lot more expensive to build. You're not achieving economies of scale. And so that's another area that we're looking at, is how can we most cost effectively build and offer our customer the best product based on location. It's not limited in the state or the size that a community solar program would be limited.
If you look back at your whole experience, vast and long experience about the energy sector, and think about what would you do now retrospectively differently? Like if you would set up now a company, and you told me you Clean Choice, you joined 3 years ago, but if you would think about, okay, what would you do differently if you would set up now a company, and what would you focus on?
Honestly, and I really mean this, this company is the company I've dreamed of from the beginning. I mean, the idea of effectively, I use this term loosely, but to build a green utility, to build a company that both has the customer relationship and also has the infrastructure to back that up, is something that has not ever been done in the United States. There isn't an equivalent model. So it is on the cutting edge of something new. And there's been a lot of solar and wind that's gotten built in the US, but it's all gotten built based on contracts with corporate offtake. And that corporate offtake has in many ways enjoyed tremendous benefits. If you think about it right now, the price of energy is like $80 a megawatt hour. Projects that got built 4 or 5 years ago were $35 a megawatt hour for 15 years that Microsoft and Meta are benefiting from, right? I mean, there's a lot of upside that's going to these large corporate counterparties, which at the time were necessary to get the bank debt. You think about it, you're a lender and you're going to lend money in your bank. You want to have a credit-worthy counterparty that you can rely on as a source of revenue. And merchant energy markets seem scary because they can go up, they can go down. What I think the opportunity of having this kind of a company is that we do have a customer relationship and we can control to some degree the price point in a shorter period of time. So a 1 or a 2 year window that's more matching what's happening in the broader economic environment at the same time that we're getting exposure to the merchant energy markets for our solar farms. So that's I'm doing what I would want to do. If I was going to do something else, it wouldn't be in solar. I would leave the industry completely. This is the thing I would do.
What would you do?
Oh, wow. Now these are powerful words. You know when you say things, you say things. I would build a retreat center.
Retreat center for
my second half of life has been one of a rich spiritual landscape and personal growth and healing transformation. And that is something that I would given the opportunity, I would spend my time walking with people in their own journeys towards reconnecting to their deeper selves.
Oh, that sounds nice. That's amazing. And I think actually the next question more or less fits to that.
Oh, good. You knew where we're going.
Especially, women always gets asked, how do you manage in a male-dominated sector? And I think it's such a boring question, like women in leadership, in male-dominated, and etc. And I got this as well a lot. But what I actually want to ask you is, what has been the most ridiculous question you have been asked regarding women in the energy sector?
Yeah, I hear that. I really do. And I guess I would just maybe bring a little more kindness to the question. So I am of the belief that, just if you talk about, I'm going to use this word loosely, the patriarchy. The patriarchy as equally impactful to men as it is to women. And that men often feel so much pressure to produce and to perform, and that their value and worth is tied to that sometimes the ego can skew and misperceive life as it's happening. And I don't take that personal to me. That's not personal to me. On the other hand, for women, I'm often asked by women, like, how do you do this? How do you earn the respect of certain people that don't respect me? And I've kind of sat with that for a while and thought a lot about it. It has only been recently that I've fully begun to understand and appreciate how much growing up inside of a matriarchy supports me in ways I didn't know it was supporting me. I have never questioned whether my hand should be raised or if I have a seat at the table. I've never waited for anyone to include me. And sometimes that rubs people the wrong way, and sometimes people love it. But whether they love it or they hate it has more to do with them than me. And I have commitments that are bigger than my own feelings or thoughts or imaginings of what other people are thinking about me. And so I think real power comes when we have commitments that are bigger than ourselves, and we're willing to put all of our fear at stake in pursuit of making that happen.
Amazing. I think that resonates with me on so many levels, because I think I've been raised the same way. I had a very strong mother who was running her company, and I exactly the same had a feeling. I never had the feeling that there is, an issue for me raising the hand or anything like that, but it is because it has been shown. And I think that's a very nice, coming back to your spiritual side, what you said, if it's a lot about that you find your own path and you walk that path. So I like the answers in a lot of levels. So thank you so much for sharing that. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
You just said we track our own path. And I know you're going to ask me at some point what books I'm reading. I just finished reading The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. And I don't know if you've read that book, but
no,
can't say enough good about it. And in many ways, what it says, the core message of the book is that we are each looking for our own track. And when we're on our track is when we are most attuned to something else that is also an element of surrender and control, right? So my best advice to myself would be to learn how to attune to what resonates as true and be willing to walk that path without clarity of outcome or destination. And that's scary. And I have a lot of compassion for the fear that can evoke. But we know we're on our path when we feel lost, because that means we're not on someone else's path. And, the other little kind of hot tip I would give myself is that leaders don't have followers, they go first.
Yeah. Plowing the way. Yeah, I like that. Plowing the way is also the last question I want to ask you, like going forward to 2050, when we all want to achieve net zero in this world. If you would look back, and what do you think could be a turning point looking back to the 2050 to today, or in the last 30 years or something? And what could be a turning point to actually bring us to that net zero?
Part of why my next venture would be a retreat center, because if you ask me, there's so many, I could give you policy answers for how we're going to get there. There are many wonderful, thoughtful, intelligent people who have come up with policy solutions that will get us there. But really, what's in between here and there is enough people who relate to life as sacred. Because there are thousands of rocks floating around in space that do not have life.
Thank you for joining today's episode. You can find show notes, background materials, and guest details on our website, sustainnow.ch. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Got an idea for a future episode or an interesting solution we should explore? Let us know in the comments or visit sustainnow.ch to get in touch. See you in the next episode.